don't expect the summit to be your windfall. Like, really look at it as a strategic positioning opportunity for either yourself or your company or your group, whatever it is you're working with, to say, look, we are generating a ton of energy around this event in order to really shine a light on your brand, and then be able to say, this is the big lesson for us.
So today I'm joined by Stephen Ladek, and he is a professional farmer turned international development expert who's become an online entrepreneur with a focus on edtech and e-learning. He has got a bunch of projects on the go, including BKK Kids, which is a community site for families in Bangkok. He's got LMS Pulse, which is a resource on all things related to learning management systems. He's formed a social enterprise association called the Social Enterprise Association. And what we're going to talk about today, though, is actually something different. The focus of our conversation is going to be all about virtual summits. He recently launched the eLearning Success Summit. So keep listening to today's podcast to learn how to create a successful virtual summit and find out how you can snag a free 20-minute strategy session with Stephen. But thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I am a trained farmer. It's weird, but no one's ever introduced me like that before, but that's fantastic.
I know, I like to dig into people. I did a bit of stalking and I just scrolled to the bottom of your LinkedIn and I saw he was farming and ranching. I was like, this is amazing. I've never met a professional farmer before.
Go Rams. It's true. Yeah.
So, let's talk about that though. So you thought you were going to be a farmer, or at least that was an interest of yours. And then what happened?
I did. I got a degree in farm ranch management because I still think it's a beautiful way to live. And I believe in, permaculture, organic farming, sustainable living, intentional communities, all those kinds of things. So that's where I was directed. And then, of course, I graduated with that degree and immediately started working for a technology company. So that's, that's like literally what happened. When you get a degree from a land grant university in the United States, something like Colorado State University, Arizona State, these kinds of things, a typical path out, if you don't have a family farm, I come from the suburbs of Denver, right? I'm a Leave It to Beaver kid. If you don't have like a ranch or a farm to go home to, there's basically a couple of different paths. One, you can go into food processing, right? Or two, you can go into banking. Those are really the two big outlets, right? So and neither of those appealed to me at all. Like being in rural Kansas, being a loan shark for farmers, no way. So I ended up stumbling into this is back in the 90s. I stumbled into a technology company. They were doing something that everybody thought was absolutely crazy at the time. They were creating maps for farmers, right? By using the GPS system that we all now, absolutely rely upon every day with our phones to get us everywhere with Google Maps and whatnot. And so I started basically being a salesperson and helping creating maps and whatnot. Once you come out of a land grant college with a farm and ranch degree, if you don't have a farm or a ranch to go to, which I don't, you either go into banking or you go into food processing. And neither of those were interesting to me at all. And so I got lucky. I stumbled into a company that did technology, and that technology was creating maps for farmers using the GPS system. And everybody was like, back in the day, you had to go buy a big old transceiver and you can put it in whatnot. But that led me into the technology world. And so the technology world was, that was initial .com boom. And that led me to one opportunity after another, after another. And so here I am today.
And so where does e-learning fit into this? Because we're going to be talking about the eLearning Success Summit in a minute. But technology is one thing. How did you get into the e-learning part of, how did your online entrepreneurship journey take you into the e-learning world?
Sure. Okay. And I am as classic an entrepreneur as you can possibly find, right? And I'm not unique in any way. It's just I really fit that mold. I always have to have 3 or 4 projects going on, or I get incredibly bored. My mother likes to tell a story about when, if we were sitting in her house, she likes to bring out this little shoebox and it has all these little name tags in it from when I was, a teenager, because I would go and get a job, at like a fast food restaurant or this or that. And I would quit in 3 months because I'm like, okay, I figured out how they did it and I'm bored. So I got to go find something else. That's carried on through my whole life. And, once I started, we can talk about this later too. Once I started my overseas life, I've been living overseas with my family for the last 16 years, even though I'm originally from Colorado. I started a consulting company, and that consulting company worked in something called the Development and Humanitarian Aid Program or industry. That's where I have my second degree, as you probably found out, in international peace and conflict resolution, because I wanted to figure out how we stop, how do we start solving problems between one another without killing each other? That was my big question I wanted to answer, right? So where does that journey take you? Clearly, I did not do a good job. And to take you to where we're at is that, that consulting company lived for almost 16 years, 15 years or so. And along the way, I always had a side hustle going on. So consulting is very human intensive most of the time. My consulting company was no different in that, we had to show up on site for clients and do work for them. Throughout that process, I wanted to figure out, what is this online world? How do I become a part of it? So 7 years ago, I made my first purchase of my first, internet company. It was a company called Moodle News. Moodle is a learning management system, and it's the world's most popular management system. It right now, believe it has over 250 million users, and there's 180,000, sites that are registered using the Moodle learning management system. I bought this from a gentleman who had started a blog, and he carried that blog on for 6 or 7 years, and then just, he was ready to hand it off to somebody else. And that's how I got into e-learning. It looked like a good business opportunity for me. I turned Moodle News into something called LMS Pulse, because we rebranded to go from learning management systems into e-learning writ large. And that's how we then also got to the eLearning Success Summit. It looks like I was a genius because of the pandemic, but honestly, it was a good business decision 7 years ago.
That's cool. So you decided to launch a virtual summit. What happened on day one? What were the first few things that you sorted out when you decided to launch an online summit during a pandemic? Had you planned that before?
Do you mean like the day the summit, like the summit was held over 3 days?
No. How did you plan it? How did you plan it out? So I'm guessing there's some run up to the summit. What happens on day one?
We had been toying with the idea, myself, and I work with several other people on LMS Pulse. We'd been toying with the idea of doing a virtual summit for about 2 years. It was kind of funny. Like we'd stopped and started, and just because it's a lot of work, right? So we would sit down and we would plan it, and then we'd look at it like, oh God, like this is just a ton of work to do. But when we rebranded from Moodle News to LMS Pulse, we needed something to wave the flag, right? We needed something to just really mark and say, look, we're going in a different direction. Rather than talking about learning management systems, we're really broadening it, and we're talking about e-learning in general, which includes pedagogy, includes data science, includes all the other stuff, in there. And so, while we were kind of searching around and changing what we were posting about on the site and the different kinds of, topics we were talking about, we said, hey, look, we've already kind of thought of the planning of this before. So let's go for it. And what we needed to do was then, the very first thing that we did was we needed to determine what is it that we were going to talk about. The pandemic that we're all used to right now in 2020, right? So we started planning this in November of 2019. So we looked like geniuses for about 10 minutes, right? Absolute geniuses. Like, I don't know, like we were predictive. We didn't even know it was going to come, but it was happening. But ultimately, we planned, and we took our cue from our audience. If you're anybody who's ever been in any kind of marketing, especially digital marketing, the first thing that they'll tell you is don't try to create a product that you think people want. Just go ask them, right? Go ask them what they want. And so we're lucky enough to have a very engaged audience, and we went out and polled them and said, look, what is it that you would be interested in learning about or interested in, seeing in a conference? And they told us, they want to know more about the technologies that they use. They wanted a lot of, focus on pedagogy or instructional design, like actually like how the practice of teaching, in e-learning. And then the sexiest topic that everybody's, the magic is, data science. Like, how do we do the analytics, the promise, of how do we, find at-risk learners and those kinds of things. So that was, it was really easy for us to plan because our audience told us, they said, look, these are the things we want. So we put 3 days together: technology, the practice, pedagogy, and then data science. And then the hard work really began, right? Once we decided on the format, you kind of really have 2 things that you need to do. And let me stop there if you want me to stop. But the 2 things you need to do is how are you going to fund it and get people to show up? And then how are you going to get the content? So which path do you want to go down first?
Yeah, let's talk about the content, because I think coming up with an idea, I think what makes total sense, ask people what they want to learn more about. So you came up with the title, and at a high level, you have this framework of here are the 3 main buckets that we're going to be talking about in the summit. But then you've got to decide, okay, well, what does this summit look like? What are the sessions? What's the format? What does the day look like? How do you actually make this interesting? Because who wants to sit in front of their computer for 3 days just staring at the screen? So yeah, talk us through that process of designing the experience and how you've kind of figured out how to fill your 3 days with stuff that's interesting and engaging.
I'll go backwards to forwards, right? The stuff that was interesting, engaging, ultimately bubbled up from the backwards forwards. So we put a call out for speakers, again, with not only the companies that we work with who do advertising with us, but and these are some, if not all, of the big LMS players out there. It was Blackboard at the time, Moodle, Desire to Learn. They do Brightspace, Sakai, and we basically said to them, look, we're going to put on this event. We want you to give us a topic that's interesting and that you think people want to learn about or want to hear about. We also went to a lot of instructional design experts, a lot of consultants in the e-learning industry, a lot of data science. Like, we have people from ACT that showed up. ACT is a giant organization that puts on a huge standardized test for college testing and whatnot. And so the topics came out of themselves, right? This is where, I didn't have a better answer about what to put together other than what's the universe going to deliver to us, right? And then so the hard part was putting that call out and finding people, but then actually just scheduling the time to get them recorded. Our virtual summit was an entirely recorded experience, so it's you come in and on day 1 you can go through a series of recorded videos, and so you can choose which one you want to watch and how long you want to watch it. Same with day 2, same with day 3. And the way that we kept it engaging was that we didn't just have someone come on and just sort of be a talking head. Like, I was actually hosted each of the individual presentations. I acted as an audience, sort of not only as an arbiter of the information, but also you got to keep it in. You got to keep the conversation flowing. You've got to pepper some questions along the way. And then when you wrap up, you've got to be able to summarize and figure out what is it that we actually took away from this. And then the third part about keeping people engaged was there's sort of 2 pieces. That one is the infrastructure we put in the background for anybody who signed up, about making sure they knew what was happening through a drip email campaign, but then also making sure that there was sort of a prize at the end of the tunnel, right? If you wanted more information, if you wanted to dive deeper, there's a Facebook group that you can join. There are expert sessions you can join. There are bonuses from the sponsors that you can get. So it's really like, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go as a conference participant?
And so, as the host, were you hosting live, or was everything pre-recorded?
Everything was pre-recorded. The only 2 things that we did live was a Facebook Live as a kickoff event. And that actually, it was the first Facebook Live I had ever done. So I was really tickled to see, 300-400 people show up in this Facebook Live and actually like commenting, and like following along. And that was really I hate to say it, like heartwarming, like it was like, wow, people they actually cared. Like, they were really interested. And then it's crazy when you put something of value out there, people actually show up. And then we also did a Facebook Live kind of as a closing, where we did a summary. And again, we did a shout out to our sponsors and kind of some of the key points that we learned along the way. And again, quite a few people showed up for that as well. But as far as the sessions, throughout the summit. They were all pre-recorded, and we just, I don't want to say strategically, but we positioned them, according to, how the different topics kind of flowed together, who was a better speaker, who wasn't a better speaker, etc.
Right. So as the host, so did you decide to like pre-record all the sessions and then you did your hosting track as a recorded thing afterwards? Or how did you kind of create that thread to tie everything together?
I recorded at the same time that the presenters did. So it was as if we were doing a live podcast,
Right.
There was essentially 41 live podcasts or vlogs, because they're all video as well as audio. Right. And I knew what the topics were coming in. So I was prepared for the topic, going along. But this is one of the great things. And I don't know if we can talk about this later too, but it's just, show up and be interested. If you want to be a great host, like that's like really the key ingredient. Larry King, this is not my, nothing. Larry King said this. He's like, just be interested, like actually come to the conversation and be like, wow, why is that? What, like really dig into the material. And if you're going to spend an hour with somebody listening to them present about something they're passionate about, do them the honor of actually like being really interested in what they're saying. So I recorded that way. And then how we structured it all, and sort of putting the pieces together for each of the days, that was kind of a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
So, let's talk about that jigsaw puzzle from a technical perspective. So you pre-recorded everything. How did you create the actual user experience around the conference? So what was the interface you used to deliver all of this content? You talked about Facebook Live. How did you stitch it all together?
Sure. Yeah. So the conference itself is hosted on a standard WordPress site. It's a custom design WordPress site for our purposes. And then we tried to use Vimeo as to host the videos on the back end. That ended up failing for some reason. We're not sure why. They just didn't like us. Maybe it's because I was in Bangkok and we had some developers in other parts of the world and whatnot. But we ended up using something called Sprout Video for our video delivery. We have a content management system called Kartra in the back end, and that helped us to figure out, who had signed up and what level they had signed up for, if they had a membership if they had bought an all access pass or not. And so using that content management system, and then, you tell me, I can dive into,
the
granularity of the text. Okay. So, you've got deadline funnels that you use in order to determine who's shown up for what part of the conference and whether or not they have access or interest to that. What other pieces? And then sort of our overarching customer relationship management was ActiveCampaign. And that's what we use to deliver our drip email and, our sequences in terms of when the conference starts, when you're notified about what session to go to, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously we're a marketing company. And so a lot of that was sales, right? A lot of that was, pushing people towards a purchase event.
Yes, let's talk about the monetization. So I understand, you mentioned your partners or your sponsors that you were already working with LMS Pulse. So you had a pre-existing relationship there to lean on. So in terms of the way that you monetized it, what, percentage was ticket sales? What percentage was the sponsorship? And kind of how did that all fit together? How does the monetization work?
Yeah, we monetized it in two ways. We monetized through sponsorship and through ticket sales. So those are the only two that we used. And I'd love to just, if we can remember that sort of the follow on to this is, what do you do after the conference is over, right? Because that's the big lesson learned for me. But, our initial push was to go out for sponsorship because we wanted to have sponsors in order to cover the cost of developing the platform, my time and other people's times in order to bring on speakers. We didn't pay any speakers. It was much like any other sort of academic conference where they weren't even given an honorarium or anything. And then we had what's called an all access pass and an all access. So let me first talk about the sponsors. So the sponsors, we had a bronze tier, a silver tier, a gold tier, and a platinum tier. We ended up having a bunch of bronze and platinum, silver sponsors, and we had one gold sponsor, which was LMS Pulse at the end of the day. And that was, like I said, that was really sort of, can I put enough in a bucket that I know I'm going to break even on this deal, right? That's where I wanted the sponsorship piece to go. And it kind of came down to the wire, if I'm honest. Like so many things, like events and these types of things, we had a great response, lots of interest, but then you've got to follow up with each of those leads. You've got to, negotiate each of those deals, and sort of those conversations. That sales cycle takes a while, and so it kind of came down to about a week or two before the actual thing went live, where I think we signed up, like inked the deal with like 5 sponsors, right? Like a week before the show went live. But then we had what's called an all access pass. So our speakers, we all incentivize them to come on board by saying, look, give us something of value. This can't be a sales pitch, right? We're not interested in that at all. But on the back end, can you give a discount? Can you provide maybe a trial subscription for 6 months, or maybe you give, there's a giveaway, or, a link into another course or something like that. And so every speaker had that opportunity. And if you bought an all access pass, you would then get into, have access to those bonuses, as well as access to the All Access Pass Facebook group. There's, several hundred people in that now. And so throughout the conference, there's basically we put the ticket value at $495, which is a big price, in today's interweb for, that's a high ticket item. But, we used a fairly typical sales process where, when you first sign up, you're given a one-time offer that's much, much smaller. And then when the conference starts, you're given it's like, hey, look, that one-time offer's gone, but here's another price that's during the summit. Then there's an encore pricing. And then there's, sort of like, hey, you missed all the discounts. If you want it, you just buy it. And surprisingly, we had quite a few people show up and actually pay full price. It was that actually worked out. So.
That's cool. So in terms of the revenue breakdown, ticket sales versus sponsorship, what percentage would you say was sponsorship versus ticket sales?
A little less than 2/3 sponsorship, about a third ticket sales. Yeah, so that's about that. I think that we could have done better on ticket sales. This was my first rodeo, and so maybe there was a different way to position the value, or a different offer strategy or something like that. But we did pretty well.
And it seems like, or it sounds like, the process around acquiring sponsors took longer than you anticipated it would, which is why you had some space still left in sponsorship. Were there any kind of lessons learned from your experience in really helping the sponsors understand the ROI, or anything that helped you eventually seal the deal with those sponsorships?
Well, ultimately, sponsors, and for an event like this, they're interested in the lead generation, right? Like that's the reason that they want to get their name out in front of, in our case, the 5,000 people that showed up for the event, right? And so that was an interesting conversation to understand who was really savvy. We had some people show up who are current advertisers, in LMS Pulse, and they're like, look, I know my click per lead, or sorry, my cost per lead. I need to get it down to this. It's like, we need to go negotiate that. And so we had those kinds of granular conversations. Other ones were just more interested in long-term branding strategies and want to be associated with this kind of event. And so I don't think that I was surprised as much about the sales cycle, because I've been in sales for a very long time. So that didn't surprise me so much. I think what surprised me was who ended up ultimately sponsoring, and who ultimately ended up kind of walking away for what for me, it just seemed like no good reason, because I thought we had a better relationship. But it's interesting, because now if we decide to rerun which we are, we're going to be doing another summit here in about 4 months or so, at least, in April of 2021. I now have a heck of a lot of data that just shows like, hey, look, this is what we did. This is the results we got. Do you want to get on board or not? Yeah.
Can you share how much on average you got from a sponsorship deal?
Well, yeah. So the bronze tier was $2,500. The silver tier was $5,000. Gold tier was, I want to say 10,000. And then we had a platinum tier that was sort of like, you could be, eLearning Success Summit by LMS Pulse and X, right? And nobody wanted to show up for that. And ultimately we held out the lead generation piece on that one, right? Because it's quite simple. It's, we were prepared to spend an awful lot of money on ads in order to bring in the audience. And so, we needed to make sure if we were going to do that, we had to, and somebody wanted to buy that list, it had to be worth it for LMS Pulse as well. So.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so now that you've done it once, you've done the summit once, you just talked about, hey, you're planning on running this again in April 2020. What have you been able to operationalize, or what processes have you put in place that are recyclable as you create additional new summits?
Well, the entire infrastructure for the summit, is recyclable now, right? We don't have to build the summit WordPress site from scratch. We've got Kartra already set up. So really it's a matter of, if we want, just simply tweaking that platform so that it's got our new theme for the next summit. We would then just have to go out and do the process of actually recording the speakers again and whatnot. One of the things that we've heard, though, is we've, again, listened to our audience, right? We're polling our audience right now and saying, what do you want to change? They have asked for live sessions, right? So we know that we're going to have to do a mix of some, we want to keep a lot of it recorded because we think there's great value in being able to access it on demand. But some people said, look, we want to be able to, this expert is on the stage and, we really appreciate them. And so we want to actually ask questions in real time. So we're probably going to have some of those definitely in play. Also the format that we used, right? Everything was a plenary session in the last summit. They've definitely asked for small workshop type of sessions. So either, breakout opportunities or whatever. I'm not sure if that's going to be possible, but that's definitely been a big ask. So the technology, the platform, all of those things, they're all in place. They're sitting there, they're humming, they're going along. Something we didn't talk about is that we not only ran the summit in April as a launch 3-day event, but once that event had sort of passed, we transitioned into what's called an evergreen event. So that if you were to show up, let's say in July, we were still advertising the summit. The advertisement would come up and say, hey, look, why don't you join the summit? It starts in 48 hours. Right. And, then you would be taken through not only all of the sessions, but then all of the sales pieces and everything like that. So we were actually still making sales today. Like we're still making sales today on this summit. We'll be shutting it down soon so that we can, make space for the other one. And then on the sales and speaking side, it's about recycling it's our process of call for speakers and call for sponsors. And what one of the biggest things that we learned was you just got to get out in front of it sooner than you think. When you're dealing with our kind of industry, e-learning industry, like these are corporate, in the most classic sense, right? They determine their budgets, 6 months ago. And so I've already peppered, most of our advertisers with, hey, we're going to be redoing this. Are you interested? Many of them come back and said, yeah, we're interested. So I've started that conversation already because that was a big lesson last time. And they're just like, look, we would love to join you, but our budget's already allocated. The ship has sailed a long time ago. We don't have anything ready. So those are a few of the pieces.
Yeah. And so what else from the kind of initial experience were lessons learned that you've taken away from running a summit that's pretty successful, really? Like you broke even, you got 5,000 people plus to sign up, you got sponsorship. But what are some of the lessons learned that you'll take away and that could be valuable for other people planning a summit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and just to set the record, right? I mean, we broke even on with our sponsorships, so we were profitable. It was a profitable event for us. And profitable in more than one way. If you just look at what we did in the summit, we were profitable, but we actually have now crafted a number of marketing and advertising and co-sponsorship deals with people who didn't take either the sponsorship or post summit said, hey, look, we really like what you did. We'd like to we'd like to be able to talk to your audience as well. So it's really turned into some really nice contracts on the backside for the company. So that was a real thing. So one of the big lessons that I would say for anybody running a summit is don't expect the summit to be your windfall. Like really look at it as a strategic positioning opportunity for either yourself or your company or your group, whatever it is you're working with, to say, look, we are generating a ton of energy around this event in order to really shine a light on your brand, and then be able to say, this is the big lesson for us for LMS Pulse, was be prepared for what you want to do afterwards. Our number one fail was that we went into this kind of hoping that the summit would work. And so when it worked and it really was successful, we had no plan for what to do with those people afterwards, right? We've maintained the Facebook group that we have. We've kept in touch with people over the leads that we have over email. So they're all still there, and we received absolutely fantastic feedback. But was there a course we could have offered? Was there a way that we could have engaged them differently to direct them to advertisers or other services? Was there a way that we could? There's 100 different opportunities. We should have had that foresight. We should have really said, hey, look, what are the things that we want to be able to do in the end? And we just had hoped to run a summit. So
yeah. No, that's good. And I think for me, when I hear that, I think there's massive opportunity for building a community around a summit. And I think a summit could be, if you're thinking about and you're interested in creating community, which one of the things I'm excited about, a summit is a really interesting way to create a whole bunch of content, get people interested in the content, and build as an opportunity to build community. So if you're thinking about summits, think about community as well, because that is a massive opportunity, as well as selling courses or other things as well. But let's Stephen, that's super helpful. Let's finish off with a lightning round. What is the best advice that you've ever received?
The best advice that I've ever received was know when to ask for help. I can remember it back, way back in the day when I was just out of that degree and sort of getting into my first job or whatever. I've had more than one manager say, look, hey, you're a talented guy and, you do some things, but you don't know when to ask for help, right? Like you've got to look at what you're trying to accomplish and realize that there's probably either other people who've done it, they've done it better, they've done it faster, they can answer those questions for you already. And if you're trying to lift, 20 boxes at the same time, ask for that help. And it may seem like, okay, your profit's going to go down or you're not going to make as much money, or maybe you're going to have to share some recognition. But at the end of the day, everything gets lifted, right? And it's just absolutely imperative that we look. I love that you segued into this from community. It's like, you've got to look at things from how can we create community and lift up all boats rather than me. It's a winning formula.
Definitely. And I mean, you've had a lot of success as an online entrepreneur. Like at the beginning, I just reeled off some of the things that you're working on, and I'm sure there's even more that you're working on right now. But what do you think of your personal habits has contributed most to your success?
It may sound cliche, but I'm extraordinarily outcome focused, and I'm willing to take a risk. And so, being outcome focused means that I don't deal with timesheets. I don't ask people for, I don't get into the details. Basically, I set up visions and I set up, clear criteria for what success looks like. And then I hand that off to someone, or I hand that off to a team with with clear deadlines and, kind of milestones along the way. And that's just, I haven't found any other better way to generate success in scale, but doing that. So being outcome focused is huge. But then I have failed a lot, right? Like you just have to be willing to jump off the cliff. And, if my wife were here right now, she would tell you how many times I've failed. Like, I've and spectacularly sometimes. But being able to get up and see and get excited about an opportunity and really be able to connect those dots and say, all right, look, I think a summit it's the right thing for us at the right time, and then make the leap, because you're going to have to spend $10,000, $20,000 to really get it done. Even if that's just your personal time, you're going to have to spend the money. So make the leap and do it, but then go whole hog, right?
Yeah, that's great. And is there an internet resource or tool that you use regularly that you love using?
It's that, that's a good question. I mean, I'm like anybody else. I rely on Slack. I rely on WhatsApp. Any sort of direct messaging sort of chat is critical for me to be able to manage teams and whatnot. But I say that tongue in cheek because I see a lot of new projects that we're still trying to solve the online project management piece out there. And I love, nobody's ever gotten it right. Nobody's ever been able to do it because project management is messy, right? It's a human affair. And ultimately, that would be one that I'd love to see solved. But then you get to the point where you realize, hey, wait a second, I don't think it can be solved. So, I'm a huge user of Slack. That's kind of my go-to resource right now. But other than that, no, take it as it comes.
And have you read a book recently that you'd recommend?
Not recently. But I would recommend a book. One of my favorite books is one that came from my master's degree. The first one that I did was it's called Getting to Yes by Uri and Fisher. It's a classic negotiation book, but I still find it really interesting when you get into conversations, not even about sales, but just in everyday conversations and internal politics in your company or whatever, about understanding what a BATNA is, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Like, looking at what you really want to get out of something, your interests, changes, your ability to go into that conversation rather than saying, no, it must be this way. You're like, actually, what do I want to get out of this? And it seems really, really simple, but being able to practice it every day, I think that would be the book that I would recommend.
Nice. And we haven't really dug into this, but you are a digital media entrepreneur with BKK Kids, with LMS Pulse. We haven't even talked about that today, but for someone who's at the beginning of their journey to create content, to create community, which is something that you do, someone who's at the beginning of this path on creating digital media, what is one piece of advice that you'd give to them?
Yeah, it's stupid. I mean, you've heard Gary Vee say it. You've heard any number of people. You've heard blah 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 people. But just start doing it today, right? So if that is if you want to be a blogger, start writing a post every day. If you want to be a vlogger, start creating a video every day. If you want to be a TikTok, influencer, make a TikTok, make a video. And the reason why you do that is, one, you don't know where the path is. Ultimately, at the end of the day, every entrepreneurial journey is more like a merry-go-round rather than, a straight path. You're constantly reinventing yourself and pivoting and, showing up in different ways for your audience as it grows and changes and evolves. And so by doing that, you're not only allowing yourself to continue to evolve, but you're growing this muscle, right? And it's hard to explain how important that is. Just being able to make sure that every day you write a blog post, because by, 6 months into it, suddenly it becomes not only second nature, but you learn these tricks and you learn these tips and you become connected to, different technologies and whatnot. And so, again, I'll date myself here, but Jerry Seinfeld, right? He's got a great technique. People ask him, like, how did you become successful? And he's like, I write every day. And they're like, what are you talking about? He's like, I have a giant calendar and every day I put an X there. I have to write jokes every day. If I don't do it and an X doesn't go up, I failed. And he's like, I have calendars that are decades long where I did, or I wrote a joke every day. And that was his path to success because it allowed him to grow that muscle and constantly be refining who he was and what he was doing. There you go.
Awesome. Stephen, where can people find out more about what you're up to, what you're doing, and your next projects?
If you want to follow me, I'm horrible at social media, but look at Ladek.com, Ladek.com. That's, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I love to help other people. I've been helping other people for more than a decade, actually almost 2 decades now, not only in e-learning, but, online entrepreneurship and just sort of how do you start, run and grow a business that's sustainable. And so I provide a free 20-minute, strategy session to anybody that wants to sign up. So if you go to Ladek.com, you can click on, schedule a time with me and you're in.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe on indiemedia.club and stay in touch. Leave us a review on iTunes as well if you feel so inclined, because we haven't gotten it yet. But until next time, thanks for listening.